Hello, and welcome to another episode of Exploring Kodawari. Our guest for this episode is another musician, this time a double bass player named Keenan Zach. We've known Keenan for years. We've seen him perform countless times, hung out with him a lot, and he's a great player and an overall inspiring person. Keenan plays both jazz and classical music, and he's currently pursuing his doctorate at Stony Brook University. So in the first half, we talk about some aspects of jazz, like what is groove and how does it work, and how does one practice improvising for jazz. And then we also speak about the differences between jazz and classical music training, and how there can be a wonderful cross-pollination between the two. And in addition to music, Keenan also has years of experience with a disciplined meditation practice. He's been to meditation retreats. In fact, we recorded this one day before he was starting a 9-day online meditation retreat. So in this second half, we went pretty in-depth about mindfulness, meditation, what is enlightenment, how to let go of things, and various other topics in that world of meditation that have helped Yanka and I with our well-being, and Keenan as well. All right, before getting to the episode, let me remind you that we now have timestamps included in the episode notes, so you can scroll to the sections that you want. Or if you listen on our website, you'll actually be able to click those timestamps and be automatically taken to the moment. If you want to support the podcast, you can click the links to our donation page, make a one-time or a recurring donation through PayPal. As we develop, we'll find ways to create special content for our subscribers, but for now, your reward will be our loving gratitude, whatever that's worth. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy our episode with Keenan Zach. All right, Keenan. Zach, welcome to Exploring Kodawari.
Hello.
It's good to be here. What's up, guys?
How's it going?
Pretty good.
I mean, we just said how's it going.
Yeah, let's don't pretend like we didn't talk at all.
I usually introduce people like a little bit in the introduction,
Sure.
but like, can you just talk about who you are, what you do, music,
Yeah. So my name
all the
is
jazz?
All the jazz. My name is Keenan. I am a double bass player by profession, and I am a grad student at Stony Brook University. I'm a jazz musician mostly. Play a lot of classical music and other newly created music, mostly improvised music. And original music is my passion. I love playing music that is newly created, preferably by people that I know and I'm friends with, or that I've created myself.
Word. Do you write music? Like, how much have you done that?
Yeah, not a lot, but writing music has always been part and parcel of my learning of music. Like, I think anything I've ever studied and learned, part of that process was also improvising with that material, which has led to composition of new things itself. However, like, I don't develop it a whole lot. I think that's something I would like to do more of in the future, is like really develop these ideas that have come to me through all of my studies and learning. But that's definitely a different practice.
Yeah. Well, improvising too, you probably, when you're practicing improvising, are you practicing writing in a sense, right?
Sure. Sometimes, right, writing out improvisational solutions, right? Like, for instance, I currently study with Stefan Crump, he's a jazz bass player, one of the best in the world at what he does. It's really astounding what he's crafted as a musician and his concept for improvisation. And I had a lesson with him yesterday, and I've been working on this concept, improvising over a 21 pulse pattern and breaking it up in different ways that still keep the same skeletal structure of the 21 pulses, which is derived from the specific melody. And I'm thinking of it in two different contrasting ways. And so to get better at improvising in the context of those 21 pulses, I do a lot of composition, of like writing out ideas, to concepts to play with and play over,
Right.
that I will then improvise with.
We talked about that in the episode we did with the composer. You know Nathan, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, of course you do. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And we were just saying any performer is part composer in that they're bringing
Absolutely.
something to the
The way
table.
they
Absolutely.
interpret, or yeah.
even in
Improvise.
classical music where we're more strictly following the exact directions on the page. you know?
Yeah.
So you switched your DMA is strictly classical music, or is it both?
I am active in both the classical studio and the jazz studio.
Okay.
And-
But and you're gonna have, like, I know my Baroque teacher, when she did her DMA, was like both early music and, regular not Baroque trumpet. So, like, are you going to have both things, or are you just
It's only one DMA.
Yeah.
And any DMA is not actually specified.
Sure.
Like on the piece of paper, whether you have a DMA in violin performance or well, maybe no, that I might be mistaken. Like my DMA will be in bass performance, and I'm just active in both studios. It's so
because, like, how could you not be, right? They all know you,
right? Exactly. And I mean, jazz is what I've come up on. So that comes more naturally to me, and it's really fun. It's a wonderful outlet. But the classical study is what I'm trying to pursue and cultivate, just to be a more well-rounded bass player.
Yeah, and I have this as a question later, so I might as well ask it now. What have you brought in from the classical world, and/or what do you think classical musicians could import from the jazz world? Like, do you think there's a balance where you can get the best of both worlds, kind of thing?
It's so deep.
Yeah.
It's beautifully deep, like there. And I find myself thinking about this from time to time and talking with my colleagues about it, especially in the jazz world and my teachers. They are different. Like, they're radically different lineages.
Right.
So from the varying tradition, just the tropes of expression are different. And the things that someone who's spent their life studying and training in classical music, the things that they find satisfying and that they look for are not always inherently in jazz, and vice versa. If you're a jazz musician through and through, you're born into a family that either was jazz musicians or listened to jazz music growing up, you're going to have things that you hear that make you feel good that just aren't really present in the same way in classical music.
Right.
That being said, but it's still music. It's still rhythm and pitch. But like how that gets treated is definitely different. And I think it's really filling for anyone who knows one of them to spend time thinking about and listening to and playing the other, because it's all just informative.
Yeah.
I think like what I've come to realize in working with Blake Hinson at Stony Brook, he's the bass teacher. He's the classical bass teacher at Stony Brook. Whatever you're playing, to have it dripping with intent and musical expression, right? Like, you have to think about it from as many dimensions as you possibly can, from articulation and intonation, vibrato, all of these things, but even the phrase itself, like, how is that phrase constructed? Where is it coming from? Where is it going? How is all of this functioning in a hierarchical level in context of the whole thing that you're performing? And
even if that's an hour-long Mahler symphony.
Exactly.
And now, of course, some of your job is not in the Mahler symphony. The conductor is carrying most of the weight of that.
Yeah.
But it's still, the more aware you are of that larger structure, the more
like tracking the climax and being able to understand where you are in relation to that, and just fly that plane.
Is this the climax or like a sub little climax at movement 2?
Exactly. But my jazz teachers have talked about the same thing. Mark Helias is a bass teacher of mine. I studied with him when I was doing my master's at Stony Brook, and he's still a mentor, teacher, and friend to me, but he would always talk about these things, but in context of improvisation, that when you're spontaneously creating music or even improvising over a tune or a structure, you have to have that same consciousness of where you are in the arc of what you're playing and creating.
Yeah.
I see. I have a question that kind of goes along with what you asked, I think, Luke. I was just curious about what are the like pros and cons of like each world, or like what your jazz like upbringing, I would say, can contribute to like being a classical musician, like being a classical player. I was just curious.
Oh, you
about
mean
that.
like the weaknesses? Like,
Yeah, but that's not necessarily weaknesses. I would think maybe more strengths. Like what are your strengths, you think? Because I feel like as classical players, we can be very boxed in, just very boring at times.
Yeah.
We can't really just get out of one simple, like one kind of solid mindset.
So a lot of things come to mind as you ask that question. And the first of which is, as a jazz bass player, a lot of jazz is not performed in keys that are really idiomatic to the double bass. Like the bass is a C instrument, but as a jazz musician, I don't play in the key of C major a lot. So in learning jazz repertoire and how to play it and just performing a ton of it, I was playing in keys that are not necessarily easy to play in, and also
idiomatic for the double bass. But even like in jazz pedagogy, they talk about if you're learning something, learn it in all 12 keys. So if you have a melody and like you just learn it in all 12 keys, like you really learn how to map out not
the
just like
instrument.
C, F, B flat, E flat. Oh, it's getting kind of hard. I'm done.
Yeah, exactly. And so I haven't experienced that same openness to playing in all 12 keys in classical studies. But the contrary is that. So if you're, as I'm now learning literature written for the double bass, it's written in keys that the bass can really play in and sound really good in it.
Right.
Create this expressive thing that can really captivate a listener's attention.
Yeah. Especially on trumpet, you can tell when a composer knows the key they're writing in. So certain keys, the trumpet just sits in. You get that resonant, centered sound, and other keys are awkward, and you're just like, why the fuck? So I guess it's the same. I mean, what about violin? Like, would you say certain keys sit well on the violin and other keys are just awkward?
Like higher the sharps are, it's getting really sketchy.
Right.
Intonation wise, that's true.
We like flats. I think trumpet keys E flat and B flat are just like money. Everything else is like, well, we can also switch trumpets too. So you can switch your harmonic series, and like then the whole game changes.
Yeah.
That's part of why we do it.
Sure.
Not just for the easy fingerings, although sometimes that's why.
Yeah. Well, if you got it.
For non-jazz musicians or non-musicians generally, can you describe like what groove is? When I first started listening to jazz, which was maybe, I don't know the year, but let's say 10 years ago. And before that, I was in undergrad, didn't really listen to jazz, didn't understand it. And then I finally started to understand it. And when I did, I was just like, I would get entranced in like, oh, the groove, like what is that? What is the groove? Sorry, this is a hard question.
That's a hard question. And another thing that I think about a lot, and I think groove varies from jazz to like classical music or more pop-oriented music. Like each has its own groove. So in one sense, groove is whatever that thing is that makes it feel good. Like the logic. If you're able to, with your body or your ear, connect with a logic in what you're hearing, that's the groove. And like whether it's conscious or subconscious, like, so that's a groove perhaps in its most broad abstract term. In terms of like jazz music, groove, I think, has come to be associated with a very consistent pulse. That there's an underlying pulse that is generally unmoving. So it sort of creates this metric field, a metric scape, or a metric lattice that is underlying all of the musical elements that we experience. And then those musical gestures are laid on top.
Sure.
And when they lock into that metric lattice, then the groove feels really good.
Right.
Yeah.
Or on the counter example, the groove is there in the rhythm section, so the bass and the piano, drums maybe. And then you have Chet Baker just floating on top,
Right.
seemingly independent from that, yet
Right.
also
Right, but
in it,
tracking it
on
like,
the macro scale.
Yeah. Like it isn't necessarily computer driven. It's not like everything lines up to the highest echelon, right? Like some of the most exciting musical moments are when there's tug between the musical voices, right? So like, a rhythm section that's like locked in and cooking along, and then a soloist who's pushing and pulling against it, like in just the right moments to create that excitement.
I remember a teacher, maybe it was at some masterclass, I forget, but they said about that sort of tension of time and slowing down, or creating a lyricism in how you play.
Or even creating like a more complex rhythmical structure on top of that groove. That's what amazes me. I mean, I don't have the right terminology in jazz, but what I'm hearing is like when someone, like there's a drum solo or something and it just gets really complex, but you can still hear that groove is like coming through. It's just, I think, amazing.
Yeah, it's so satisfying.
They said stretch the fabric of time without breaking it. And it's that idea of you can have tension with your rhythm section if you're a soloist, but just don't break the connection. Stretch it.
Don't
play
break
with it,
the thread.
Yeah.
To me, it's amazing how you guys can do that. Like, because I was obviously raised really in a box, like classical conservatory type. So it's just so unbelievable how that's possible and how that just emerges naturally. You don't really rehearse for that. I mean, you do probably, but also
I have practiced it so much, and I still continue to practice it, and like I have explored it so deeply. I think for some people it comes really naturally. I think it also like depends on your tradition and lineage as a musician. So I have some friends that are gospel musicians. And I remember going to their church, and I went for a period of time because I was really fascinated by just these human beings. I mean, I grew to love them and they became my family, but like observing them. So my good friend Byron played drums in his church, and his dad was the preacher, and his dad also played organ. So when his dad got off the organ to go and preach, Byron went to play the organ. And then his little brother went to play the drums.
That's hilarious.
And his little brother's like 10 when I first started going there, and playing with
just killing it,
feeling like I wasn't experiencing in other musical outlets at that time.
Who was our last episode? Stephen was just talking about growing up around gospel and how that's affected his feeling towards music. Right? Yeah. Now, the thing I love, speaking of groove, is also like specifically on bass, where you can have this feeling of being on the front side of the beat. You're not just going like dun 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 dun, but dun dun dun. Like you're leaning forward in the time, not quite rushing. But is that something you practice? Like do you practice with a metronome clicking and then try to just kind of like lean forward?
That's such a good question.
That's a hard groove to get into, I think.
Yeah. So I think a lot of for me right now that is a reflection of personality. If I'm playing with a jazz big band, like there are like 19 folks playing music at once, and their horn sections trying to play these lines in unison, and it's really easy for that to not be on the front of the beat. So it's like my job as a bass player to balance that by really playing on front of the beat. Like no matter where they're putting it, I'm putting it in front of it, because it's like it's this propulsive effect.
You're the fuel that keeps it going forward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if like I just lay back and just try to make it feel good, then all of a sudden it's just like the air is let out of the balloon, and
Yes.
everyone starts looking at
Wow.
you, the bass player, like you're not cutting it.
Yeah.
We're gonna call someone else because you.
Yeah.
But in smaller ensembles, that still same play is in place, like between a bass player and a drummer, and so around groove, which groove could be thought of like that underlying consistent magnetism, metric scheme, but the way that the musicians play around that is what creates the pocket.
The pocket, right.
The pocket.
So I use that word pocket in music a lot. The pocket of a note, right? I'll tell a student like, they're playing a note on the trumpet, but it's not centered. They're not capturing pitch center. And I just say, settle into the pocket of the note. But then with pitch, it's funny we say settle into the pocket because a groove is actually a cut into something that you should settle into, right? And you know it when you do it.
Yeah.
And when you aren't in the groove, you're just like, what's up? Something's wrong.
Turbulence.
Yeah. Yeah,
Exactly.
like a plane.
Exactly.
When the plane is in smooth mid-flight and you're like, I'm on a plane? What? Like, I just feel smooth.
Right.
Yeah. Like Chet
good
Baker
analogy.
when he's like, floating, it's like smooth as butter, you know? Is butter smooth? Is that a saying?
I don't know.
Butter's
Don't ask
smooth.
me.
Butter's smooth.
I have so you talked about that a little bit of improvisation and you practice that.
Yeah.
How is there anything that you specifically do to obviously it should be very natural, but you still practice. Anything you do to make that process more natural for yourself? Like how do you practice improvising?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think there are a number of ways to go about it. Like, again, there are a lot of dimensions. And I've had teachers that have showed me different ones. But I think the answer to your question will come from what I learned from Ray Anderson, who's a master improviser and has been for decades. And he has built his philosophy towards life and his career like around this way of improvising. And for him, it's playing your emotions. And that's a practice that I do frequently. When I'm really doing it often, it's every day. And what I do is I just set a timer for 15 or 20 minutes and I just play. And I don't, maybe I play something like a tune or a melody or something. Like I just allow whatever naturally wants to come through me to come through. And sometimes that means that I'm not feeling or hearing anything. And then maybe I try something and respond and react to that. But I think to get good at improvising, you're developing your relationship with yourself as an improviser.
With your deeper, wherever the ideas come from, which is a little mysterious, right?
It can be. That's one thing. But even just getting comfortable with thinking of yourself as an improviser. Like if you want to, so the short of it is, how do you get good at improvising? Well, you improvise.
Right.
Yeah.
And then those things that come up in the context of improvisation, like whatever emotions you might feel like, this feels great. I'm floating on top of the world. I don't want this feeling ever to stop. And you play it and it feels great. Or very often the contrary feeling comes up. We're like, what am I doing? This is awful. Who is this playing the bass right now?
What jackass is playing?
Because he should just stop. You never should have started.
Yeah.
So
But
right.
it's like, so then it's developing, how do you communicate with that voice and how do you really negotiate that and learn to just love and befriend that voice and accept it as energy. And when you can transform those thoughts and emotions into energy and then channel that energy through your instrument, that can yield a really compelling performance.
Right. A truthful performance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Truthful.
That was going to be my next question. How do you quiet that criticizing mind constantly being behind what you're doing?
Yeah.
But I think the key is to not quiet that, but maybe transform that into that's
I
also
think
part of your.
That's part of it, right? And I've been thinking about that exact question for years, and so much of my meditation practices have come from this, and I trying to develop emotional intelligence.
Right.
Because the easy answer is, how do you quiet that critic? Well, shut up, critic. And like that sort of works.
I mean, he doesn't go away though.
But exactly, it's like, and
he might go into his room and pout for a while, and he's going to come back out.
It's exactly like dealing with a toddler.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that the ego is a toddler. Yeah. With no shame either.
Yeah.
Because, like, I use the example before. Let's say in a relationship you have a fight, and then you're like, I'm just so mad, and then you kind of come out of the room. You're like, should we get pizza? I'm actually hungry. Because like hunger is more important than whatever stubbornness you were holding on
exactly,
to.
Exactly. Like that energy dissipated and transformed.
Yeah.
Now you're hungry.
Or as soon as you eat pizza, you'll get angry again.
I can't believe you. Yeah.
The inner critic. Yeah. Kenny Werner. Do you know his Effortless Mastery?
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a quote of his. So this would be a good transition into meditation anyways. Sure. So can you just describe, I'll read the Kenny Werner quote as we get into meditation. But can you describe your relationship with meditation? Sort of like, how long have you been doing it?
So I think I have always been drawn to those sort of mental exploratory practices. Like even as a kid, I remember being very young and like sitting down and trying to meditate before I knew what meditation was. And then like with the advent of the internet, like just trying to read about tantric practices. And I have no idea what I read or what I was like into, but the interest was there. And then in my late teens, early 20s, I came across things like that Kenny Werner book. And like that was probably one of the first things that I connected with and developed like a practice of meditation.
Right.
You know, included in that book, he has these four guided meditations.
The CD, yeah.
One of them is like 5 minutes, another one's 20 minutes. Like there are a few of them. And so I really explored them, and I was able to get into the practice of doing that daily.
If I remember correctly, those are more like just self-love type meditations, right? Quieting that inner critic, right?
Quieting the inner critic and trying to gain some harness around the thoughts and outlining the possibility that the world around you is of your creating. That if one quote comes to mind where in one of his guided meditations, he poses the question like, what if you are God? And what if every day for the next 10 years you told yourself, I am great?
Yeah.
How would your world change around you? And that was really transformative for me. And I thought about those things a lot. And even just that idea of like saying, I am great, like that's something that stuck with me.
And it's so antithetical to Western cultures, which is like, keep an eye on that ego, like don't love yourself, hate yourself, self-improvement, constant.
It's a very sensitive balance. It can definitely go
I think
off.
it's a balance. You don't want to go around saying I am great, therefore I don't need to self-improve or something, right? But
it really helps if you have, I don't know, the opposite side. Like I personally have like low self-esteem I could really benefit from that.
That's what I mean. Yeah. And as performers,
oh man,
in the moment of performing, you are great. Otherwise, you're not in that space. He always talks about the inner place where you're not attached to results. There's no fear. There's no expectation, right? It's just flow. And I think when I first read his book, I was 24. I think I was flying to San Francisco, and I was like panic reading the book because like I had to play a Bach cantata that I could not play yet, and I was like on the way to go play it. And I was like panic reading, like I'm not gonna land and go practice and beat my face up the day before the rehearsal. I need to just approach this from a different place. And it did work a little bit because I abandoned the like get after it harder approach and just thought I need to just totally change. And the performance wasn't great. It was okay, but things came out that otherwise wouldn't have, I think. But still, his like language of talking about the divine and the one and union with the divine, and that was all a little bit too woo-woo and wishy-washy for me at the time. But fast forward like 3-4 years and I've gotten way more into mindfulness and meditation. And those words might invoke a weird religious meaning, but I don't think they're meant to be religious. That you,
Agreed.
You can be totally secular and connect with the idea
Yeah.
that God is inside of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That there's perfection. Like you don't have to get things from the external world and bring them in and seek them. That you can just stop and find perfection.
And be perfection.
Right.
Allow the perfection that you are naturally as a human being to resonate in the moment.
The quote I wrote down from Effortless Mastery, it's and he says right before this, even Christ said the kingdom of heaven lies within, you know. But the quote, he calls it the inner space, like capital I, capital S. The inner space is a place where joy, pleasure, and fulfillment, worldly and otherwise, are available in unlimited supply. Acceptance of these gifts allows the flow to increase. Performances given from this state are said to be greatly inspired, leaving their audiences profoundly moved. A concert given by a performer who has attained this state is regarded as an event not to be missed. And then he says Bill Evans called this space the universal mind. And in classical music, certainly, we always connect when we see that.
Yeah.
Because you don't see it often, actually, in classical music. You
Yeah.
see really high-level playing, but you don't see that union with the divine type playing of like the ego is gone. You don't see them there. You just see
free expression.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those are the types of recordings that I always go back and want to watch a million times.
I'll try to remember to link this, but that Scottish fantasy
Stefan
recording.
Jakobs, yeah.
Oh
it's
my
amazing.
God.
What recording is this? I would love to see.
It's this violinist. He's very young, I think, in his maybe beginning of his 30s. His name is Stefan Jakub, I don't know. And then he's playing Brooks' Scottish fantasy. And then you can just see the joy in the orchestra player's face, not the soloists. Like they're just loving to be a part of that experience. It's just the most amazing.
You know how people
Incredible.
describe like being around the guru? Like they're just radiating like a heat lamp, like radiating love. And like some soloists seem to capture that. When they play, they're just like, you're like, what the, whoa, I'm in the presence of something right now. And it's like gives you chills just to hear a phrase, you know, like when he phrases, it's not a person making a phrase. There's a phrase flowing through him.
It's a phrase.
Yeah, it's a phrase. Yeah. Full stop. Yeah. Damn. More zoomed out in meditation, was there a moment of like waking up for you where you like a shift in like for me, I think I felt a moment where I didn't even know I could be distanced from my thoughts. I didn't know I could look at a thought from another place. And like, I kind of think of that as like a stage of waking up where doesn't mean I don't get lost in thoughts, but it means that I know the difference between getting lost and having mindfulness.
Yeah. I don't think there was a particular event.
I mean, you started young, right? So it's probably hard to...
Yeah, it definitely is something that evolved over time. I would say, like, recently there was a pretty stark change, though, in my practice and just like in my emotional life. And that coincided with like I changed my meditation practice and I started diligently practicing for an hour each day, meditating. I'd been building up until that 5 minutes, 15, 20, 45, and then just made that shift to a solid hour. But also in that, like I really started changing my life in other ways. Like I stopped drinking and smoking and really just started to like live a cleaner, be just very conscious of what I put into my body. For me, like that sense of waking up evokes the idea that I wake up to what is getting in the way, right? Like, so in Buddhism, they talk about like the Buddha mind it's your natural mind as a human being. Naturally, in your most pure state, you have this empowered mindset, and there are just these things that come to clutter it, from the world that we live in, from the life you were born into, your family history and stuff. And that has really come into focus for me of late, as I've come to realize how emotion and trauma has stuck inside of my mind and then led to things that obscure the clarity or that awareness.
Right. And our instincts to do things that distract from that.
Exactly.
Like drinking and drugs of any
Exactly.
kind
Yeah.
are
Exactly.
often I don't want to open that closet door of my mind and
Exactly.
see
Yeah.
the mess in there.
Mm-hmm.
Let's close that puppy right up.
Distract
Right.
myself with anything else.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you go through it like you're going through a relative's like closet who died and you just have to just figure out what's in there.
Yeah. Exactly.
You know, you can learn some shit about like, oh wow, look at this old thing from my childhood I didn't even remember was in there, yet was still influencing my behavior. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Like there can be, what do they call it? Like memories that you didn't even know were influencing you. That when you see them, or you know, a lot of people do psychedelics and these memories come right in front of their eyes, like in the form of a demon or something, you know?
Sure.
And then they have to reckon like, oh, wow, like that happened when I was 7 and I didn't even
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah.
Yet it was fucking up every relationship I had or every this or that.
Hello.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I suspect more people experience that than one would imagine.
Sure. Or more people have those closets in their mental house and they either know it and kind of look away from it, or
They might
Yeah.
have different
Don't-
types of distractions. Like
Yeah.
some people lean to different things, I guess, different tendencies.
true.
Some people
Yeah.
lean to, drinking,
Yeah.
smoking. Like some people.
some
Just
people
consciously, like-
watch stupid TV shows.
Yeah.
Some people
Right.
always
Some people just
need to hang
whistle
out with people,
all the
right?
time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, or hum all the time, right? or anything that keeps you from stopping and looking,
Yeah.
right?
And like, yeah, just silence
But
and
it's
space.
such a difficult thing to do. I cannot blame anyone for
Of course.
refusing to
of course.
do that.
Yeah.
It takes so much to stare into that.
Well, it's so. What's the quote that Jack Kornfield, he's a Buddhist teacher, always says, or he's quoting someone else when he says this. I think it's a poet, but it's basically, sitting down to meditate is like going to a really dangerous neighborhood. Who wants to do it alone? You know, like it's really difficult to confront
Yeah.
a dangerous neighborhood at night by
Right.
yourself.
Right. Right.
'Cause you don't
Then-
know what's going to jump out of the corner.
And there are plenty of other things you'd rather do.
Yeah, yeah, totally. How would you define mindfulness? Or is mindfulness the type of meditation you do when you do that for an hour every day, or do you have a very specific meditation method?
That's such a good question. And I'm realizing lately that I don't know.
Well, is it like your own kind of self-created like conglomeration of all the different
it has
traditions?
been, but recently I'm trying to most recently I'm interested in Dzogchen meditation, Mahamudra and Dzogchen
I
meditation.
never heard of that. Can you
You've done it
clarify?
though. We've done it on the Sam Harris meditation app.
Oh, is that the
Yeah.
one where you try to detach from self, like who is behind the eyes type of thing? Or
Well, it's
no, is it
is
different?
Dzogchen where you do a lot of eyes open and you play with your visual field of subject object kind of thing.
Sure, that's
Nice.
certainly all part of it.
Non-duality. so-
I just try to relax when I meditate. Like I just sit and think, relax, and breathe.
Mhm.
And then as thoughts come in, like, noticing that I was thinking and then just going back to relax and
Really,
breathe.
is that simple?
Rest.
Right.
Like, rest is the word that I've been using a lot in my practice.
Right. The Joseph Goldstein always says meditation is so simple but not easy, meaning that the directions, the instruction manual is like sit down and breathe
Yeah.
and good luck. Like,
Right. And just don't stop, right?
Yeah.
I mean, our thoughts get in the way, like our ideas of, am I doing this? I'm not doing this. I'm fantasizing about meditation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's almost a sign that you're doing it, right?
Right.
And that's just the next layer to overcome.
And you can always meditate on whatever arises, including
Sure.
I'm so bored meditating, or
Yeah.
I can't wait
Yeah.
for the timer to go off.
That's
or,
the perfect thing
Yeah.
to meditate on.
yeah, anything
Yeah.
is perfect
Yeah.
if it's what's coming up, right?
Sure.
And people don't realize you're going to make it, 4 or 5 breaths at most when you first start.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you start to get up on the water skis, if you settle into those like long meditations, you might stay in that mindful place, meaning you're not carried off and lost with the chains of thoughts, but you're actually seeing them arise from seemingly nowhere and pass away into seemingly nowhere, the void, you know? And you go, oh, shit. Like, I didn't think that. I saw that come into my space of consciousness.
Yeah.
Whereas when we're distracted, we actually think our thoughts. Was that a sentence?
We think.
We think
We because we're so self-identified with them.
Right.
I actually think
I'm
thinking
thinking
that.
it. Right. It's we take ownership over
Oh,
it
yeah.
instead of
Good way of
it like
phrasing.
being something that just arises because it needed to arise.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I think another thing that helps me in meditation is just accepting that whatever comes up, it came up because it needed to come up.
Sure.
And it's perfect because it needed to come up.
Just like the improvisation thing where you're just like,
Yeah.
it came, so it is. You know?
Exactly. And any thought contrary to that is just judgment and a creation of a dualistic system that doesn't really have any place
Right.
in there.
There's just everything.
Yeah.
And what came was part of everything.
Exactly.
And me to say that's good or bad or hip, it's a hip lick for me to play that or
Right,
not is
right.
just more judgment.
Yeah.
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 And then you
Yeah.
can go, oh, the judging mind.
And then you
note
can
it
let
and-
that go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the patterns of let's say you've meditated for an hour every day for a year, where does that lead? Like, what do you consider progress in meditation, like compared to when you, let's say, first started this project of upping your meditation game and where you are now? I don't know, when did you up it? Was it like 2 years ago or?
About 2.5 years ago.
Okay.
Just an awareness of being able to have awareness of where I am in my meditation. Am I thinking? Am I not thinking? Am I tired? Am I drowsy? Am I feeling dullness right now? Am I anxious? Am I crying? You know, I
Yeah.
mean, like, am I laughing?
Right.
You know?
Am I in a goofy mood? Yeah.
So awareness and a comfort of that and an ease of being able to really accept that. And outside of meditation, what I observe and attribute to my meditation practice is just a patience with myself and with the situation that's happening around me. And I think a better understanding of how my emotions are at play in any
Sure.
given situation. Like, for instance, last summer, I bought a mattress and I got it at a discount because I said I would go pick it up in Bridgehampton or something.
Okay. Yeah.
And so my dad went with me. You know, I love my dad, and we took his really old minivan out there. No AC. It's July. I got this thing like literally a year ago, hottest week of the year. And we're driving to Bridgehampton, and he's asking me like, well, so which way should we go? Should we take the highway or should we take the back roads? And I was like, let's just take the highway. We'll probably get there faster. And then he's like, well, but I like taking the back roads. It's a nicer drive. I was like, but it's going to take longer. He's like, well, you know, we might sit in traffic.
Uh-huh.
And my dad hates sitting in traffic.
You should probably get a car with AC. Then.
Yeah. Just the thought of sitting in traffic like is an emotional rise for him. And in experiencing that conversation with him, like I sort of recognize that I have practiced the skill of being able to be in traffic and be like, well, I'm just in traffic and I can accept this or not. Like I can be really upset and fume internally and boil, or I can just like accept and be like, well, I'm going to be late and that might suck, but it's really not that
It's
big
funny
of a
you
deal.
say that because we've said so many times to each other how the car is the perfect place to practice.
Oh yeah.
And I think I've written that a few times in different blog posts.
Totally.
Like it's a science experiment of emotions.
Yeah.
100%.
And then you got other people on the road and like someone cuts you off and you feel that rise and then
Yes.
you're like,
Like,
you know,
I'm not going to do that.
yeah.
Like,
And then
not
you're like,
today.
well, okay, just
And
breathe
there's
and-
the psychological concept of window of tolerance. And it's the idea that when we're we're satiated, we're not hungry, we're not thirsty, we're not sick, we're not tired. We have these big windows of tolerances. So even the guy cutting you off, giving you the finger, you're going 10 miles over the speed limit in the left lane, passing someone, and they need to give you the finger. And in a big window of tolerance, nothing really disturbs you. It's like a little blurb. You're like, what just happened? But when you're hungry and late and like,
oh yeah,
your window
Right.
is shrinked. So the smallest disturbance causes you to get actually angry.
Yeah.
Now, if you're in the car with someone, well, you can't be angry at the person who just passed you. So you make a nasty comment to the person to your right or something.
Right.
And then if you're not mindful, you actually convince yourself that you're mad at the person to your right.
Yeah.
Even though it was just energy. And if you
Right.
could have absorbed it and let it arise and pass away, no harm done.
Yeah.
You know, maybe to your body stress levels, but you know, how can we not have something happen, right?
Exactly.
The idea would be, is anger going to never arise again because you meditate? Probably
No,
it will.
absolutely. Yeah. It like anger is a natural emotion and it's
Yeah.
a tool. Every emotion is a tool.
Right.
You know, it's just when we
Right.
get swept away.
You can
with
either
it.
bash people with the tool or fix things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or use it as creative energy.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I've thought about that with anger a lot. Integrated anger makes you strong.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not wise to your anger, you do and say things that your later self will regret.
Yeah.
If you're even willing to look at it, right?
Yeah. If you have the capacity to look at it.
The courage to look at it.
courage,
Like, oh my
right.
God, I've said some stupid things when I was angry, you know? Especially when I was younger. I used to get in like political fights with people. It's like, what good is that? You know?
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
You're not going to change their mind. Certainly not if
Right.
you're angry and
Right.
making them feel
So
stupid.
what is this really
Yeah.
about?
Like, I love seeing people have strong disagreements in public, and you can tell when they're meditators because they're in an intense part of a back and forth on some news show, and they go, and you can see them go, whoa.
Yeah. Like
Here comes-
harness it.
Yeah, like there's a storm here. Let me not look like Ben Affleck on Bill Maher that one time where he looked like he was on coke, honestly.
I have no idea. I
There
haven't
was a
watched
famous, like, just type into YouTube, Ben Affleck freaks out, and it's the first
Okay.
hit. He just got, like, insanely angry and started calling somebody, and everyone was like, whoa, 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 that's not what just happened. Like, you know.
Yeah.
But you could see he got swept up in the wave of anger.
Infuriated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy. What do you think of enlightenment? Have you, like, thought about that word? I mean, you've taken a lot of
Yeah.
classes and stuff, right? Like,
Sure. I've read a lot of books. I'm just getting to like a place in my studies of Buddhism, like I'm actively seeking a teacher. Like I have realized that I have a great practice, like I'm very disciplined and diligent, but like if I really want to do this with truth, then I need a teacher, you know, like
Guidance.
I may have come to a point where I can like go no further without like really studying and learning from someone who's mastered this and like of a lineage. But that word enlightenment is really interesting, and I think like it has a lot of baggage. That's a very loaded term.
Yeah.
But in its most simple term, I think like enlighten. So the lighten part, and an enlightened being is one who has put down all of the heavy karmic baggage that they carry
That's a
and
good way to put
are
it, yeah.
lighter.
Yeah.
And they have that lightness in every situation.
Yeah.
In every moment. They're not
Lightness,
marred by heaviness.
Damn, I
by
never thought about the word as
Yeah,
like the
this
lighten part. Yeah.
Yeah,
With
it's
like
really nice.
light.
way you put it.
lightness. Yeah.
Yeah. Not heaviness.
It's funny because, you know, Vipassana meditation, which is basically just your basic mindfulness meditation. They call it the Vipassana facelift when people come back from the 10-day retreats. And this photographer did an art project where he had, he took photographs of a bunch of people before the Vipassana retreat and then after. It's insane. Their before pictures, their eyes and face are bagged down with the weight of the world on them. And afterwards, they have this brightness and buoyancy and lightness in their face. Yeah. And you know it when you see it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. I never thought about the lightning. You don't have the burden of all the
Things you carry.
Yeah.
Like you were able to let them go.
yeah.
Yeah. I have experiencing that in so many dimensions in my life. And actually, like through the pandemic, I have come to realize just how much of that emotional stuff I have had carried and still carry. But it's like having that time of just being home. Like I was able to double down on all of my self-care practices and meditation and just like silence, and to silently to hear how I engage with myself when there's no one else around.
A bunch of distraction of jobs and gigs every night or something.
Really informative and really healing. And like there are huge things in my life, emotional things that like I was able to let go of or put down or start to put down in some way. And like it really feels just like much lighter as a being.
I think people generally have done one or the other, it seems, during the pandemic. Like they've either gotten worse in their mental states and their mental baggage, or if they had an idea of like meditation and the benefits that it can bring, they realized this is the perfect time. And a lot of these meditation teachers switch to sort of at-home retreats like you're doing now. Jack Kornfield, I almost did it, but of course somehow made an excuse like, oh, well, I teach on Thursdays, so I can't fit that in, you know, because part of me was scared to commit to sitting 5 hours a day, you know, because I normally do 20 minutes, let's say, you know, or 5 minutes, or, you know, depends on the day. Some days I'll remember like, oh my God, I did not find time to sit today. Let me just set a 2-minute timer. And even 2 minutes later, I'm like, like I forgot about that deeper presence. I was just caught up in stuff, you know?
So going back to the concept of enlightenment, a lot of people think of that as like an arrival point or like a moment where it just happens. So you would describe it as like a process, right? Where you get rid of those baggages.
Well, I certainly,
or
certainly
did you
a
feel
process.
a certain moment where you're like, oh, I don't have any baggages now? Like, obviously that's not.
I think
it's like traveling on an airplane without baggage. You're like, oh, I feel so free. It's a one-day flight. You know?
I would see that in two dimensions. Like enlightenment can be something that you feel in an instant and like can come and go, like in flashes of brilliance. But for someone who's practicing the path of Buddhist meditation and with a master teacher, the teacher will at a certain point impart into them empowerment. And that would represent like an arrival point, certainly like an earned, cultivated arrival point. But like, I mean, that's well beyond anywhere I am.
I forget the sect of Buddhism, but there's a sect that calls enlightenment the final disappointment. And I love that phrasing of it, because it's like, it's not the top of a mountain, because when you get there, you're like, oh, wait, there's nothing here. It's just the top of a mountain. I'm still me, you know? So you finally get there and you think I've achieved enlightenment, and it's like, what's next? Because and that's the mind, right? It's always wanting what's next.
And realizing that it's the mind that wants the more. And what is next. But
happiness is always right around the corner.
That's a creation. It's a fabrication and a construction.
We were reading this article by Jack Kornfield. I'll link it. It's called Enlightenments. And he says, so many problems arise when we put one idea to a word, like God. It's like, it's not about God, it's about gods. It's not about enlightenment, it's about enlightenments. There's so many ways to express this, like transcendent. What's the idea? The word about literally means around, right? You can talk about God, you can talk about enlightenment. Meaning you can talk around it, but you can't just like penetrate into it.
Because they're words.
Those are just mouth words.
We can talk about their sounds, that we have created a logic for and somehow understand each other. Right. But I've the most recent book I read in Buddhism really talked about that words can't, exactly what you're saying, like words, I can never replace this thermos with words. No matter how much I tell you about it. If this wasn't here, I could tell you about how it's yellow and like this tall and how the top is constructed, but it's not the same as feeling the thermos or seeing me walk in with it.
Your mental concept of thermos is yet another layer.
Even thinking about it is
Yeah.
not the same as...
That's emptiness,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah,
the Buddhist
yeah.
concept of like nothing is intrinsically a thing.
Right.
There's just everything.
Right.
And then
Right.
we make discrete objects out of the world by saying we care about this or that.
And nothing is experienced twice.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's always new. Every time you blink and open your eyes and look at this thermos, like it's another thermos at another point
Right.
in
Nice.
space and time.
Yeah.
Very true.
That's the same with you, right? Your identity is never actually consistent across time.
Mm-hmm.
In every moment you're different. You know, like
It's a different incarnation. Like
Yes.
however small you can cut it up, that's how many.
no man steps in the same river twice kind of idea,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So the kind of enlightenment, I love that you just said like before the lighten up.
yeah.
That seems to sync up more with, so in this article, Jack talks about these different teachers, and some versions of enlightenment are about uprooting your personality so that negative mind states no longer come up.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that one's pretty rare. He's met some people that he thinks have found that, but
Yeah.
the more common one is the shift in identity. So the things like jealousy, anger, negative mind states still come up,
Sure.
but you're not identified with them because you become that which is aware of those things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, so much truth in that.
the guy's name is Ajahn Chah. Have you heard of him? So he describes enlightenment as the wisdom of letting go. And he says it's available in any moment.
Yeah.
So he says, if you let go a little, you'll be a little happy. If you let go a lot, you'll be a lot happy. If you let go completely, you'll be completely happy.
Yeah. Nice.
And it's like your baggage thing of enlightened. It means maybe the way to lighten up is to
yeah.
open your hand and let the baggage fall to the ground.
The thing that you're carrying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine if you're at the airport carrying all your bags and you go, wait a second, I don't care about the stuff in these bags.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
just walk, you're like, oh, this is amazing. Like,
Yeah.
flying's not that bad.
There's this like parable I've read in a couple different Buddhist books that two monks are walking down a path, right? And they come across a young woman in a beautiful kimono, and this is the rainy season, so there's a huge puddle that they have to walk across, or like a river, and she's really hesitant too because she doesn't want to ruin the clothes she's wearing. So one of the monks just picks her up. They walk through the river and puts her down, and they walk on their way, right? And it's like a master monk and a student, and they walk for like 5 more miles, and the student finally says to the master, like, I just have to say it, as monks, we're not supposed to interact with people like that. Like, I can't believe you did it. And then the master monk said, "You're still carrying that?
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
I put that down 5 miles ago."
Right. Yeah. That's in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
The Sharon Salzberg calls this the letting go muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the terminology of when you think of letting go of something, you think of it as like not doing something, right? But the idea of like a muscle is something that when you use it and work it out, it gets stronger. So if the letting go muscle is a muscle, you can get better at letting go.
The release muscle.
The release muscle,
Yeah.
even better.
Yeah.
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 The idea that
Wow.
you can have anger in your mind and go, and then let it go. And when it's gone, it's really gone. You
Yeah.
know?
And it's the
Yeah.
best feeling ever.
Oh, it's
the
so good.
moment you feel so powerful when you realize that you can do it. I mean, I think
Yeah.
You respect yourself more. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's a great feeling.
I've been thinking about that in a certain way. And like in terms of people who have experienced like PTSD,
Mm-hmm.
like coming from war, like say you experience an event that the nature of that event is you feel emotion at a level beyond anything you've ever felt before. So your new threshold of emotional availability has been expanded
Yeah.
by some degree. And if that's a traumatizing event, you don't know how to experience positivity at that level, but your consciousness still craves that full bandwidth of emotion, but you can only cling to the trauma. Like the trauma is what remains and then what we carry with us.
Yeah.
Because it's like we're still trying to grasp that level of emotion. Like, and I think about it in terms of like an atom, like proton, neutron and electron, right? So
Yeah.
in the nucleus, protons and neutrons, and then electrons hover around. And if you inject energy into that atom, you create an ion where the electron is then it's circling the nucleus, but at a further level, right? With more energy, and it's actually like coming further away from the nucleus. Like,
Yeah.
I think our emotional field functions in a similar way.
You mean it brings us farther from who we are at our nucleus kind of thing?
I think it expands. Well, it's more of like a valence level of emotional capacity.
Oh, I see.
And if you experience a traumatic event, that suddenly your emotional capacity is injected with this energy and is now much more vast than it was. But all that's filled that new vast space is this trauma.
Right. Unprocessed. Like,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it needs to get processed in
Right.
order to put that down.
but
I
with the
see.
PTSD example, the processing is too hard because every time you process it, the original emotions
Yeah.
come back
Yeah.
with it.
Relive it.
Yeah.
And that's where these like MDMA therapy and other psychedelic therapies, and they're in like phase 3 trials at Johns Hopkins. Like
Yeah.
the idea with the MDMA is on that drug, you can be talking to a therapist. And the example they showed in a documentary was someone from either Afghanistan or Iraq said like, I blame myself for the death of like my friend and soldier that was in my unit. And then they were able to work through that and like realize, oh, it's not my fault. Like people die in war.
Mm-hmm.
But anytime he thought about that memory not on ecstasy would trigger the panic attack,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like some of this is not in our control,
right.
or the amount of control we have is questionable.
Sure.
We have some maybe,
Yeah.
but so much of it is just the subconscious just bubbling on without us.
Yeah.
Turning
I
away.
would imagine that like the talk therapy that goes hand in hand with the MDMA therapy is like crucial, right?
And
like,
all the therapists have to go through the process of taking the drug and
to understand
yeah,
it.
and I really think that's a smart idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
like,
the same thing with the psychedelic mushroom trips. They kind of decide based on your condition which version would be better for you, but it's all very guided.
yeah.
And it's the same thing with like a shaman.
Sure.
If you're down in South America
Yeah.
doing it, right? The
Yeah.
idea is like,
Yeah.
I've gone into the underworld. I know how to navigate it.
Yeah.
And I'll keep you safe.
Guide you through the underworld of
Yeah.
your emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many of these meditation teachers have a lot of experience with psychedelics because it sends you to that place of ego dissolution and these deep states of meditation, but it just sends you there. It's just like the ticket for the roller coaster. There you go, boom. Whereas sometimes it might take years of meditating and slowly
Sure.
changing how you use your attention to experience something even close to that.
Yeah, but I don't know how much I buy it. Like, so today, we had bass studio class for Stony Brook with Blake, and at the end, Blake was like, "Hey, Keenan, why don't you tell everyone what you're doing next week?" And I was like, "Hey guys, I'm doing a 9-day meditation retreat." And one of the guys wrote into the Zoom chat, "Is it an ayahuasca retreat?" Like, and we all got a good chuckle out of it. And then that was right at the end of the meeting.
Back,
So
no.
so the meeting ends, and I think about it, and like that was just really clarifying of Western culture, of this wanting it now. I want to take this drug so that I don't have to meditate for 10,000 hours.
Sure.
I can just take this drug and I'll be further down the path. But like, I think
Well,
when you,
I mean, the
You-
fact that it's commercialized and then there are flights and, packages for
Sure.
ayahuasca.
The complete
Yeah.
package
Because-
for the ayahuasca
exactly,
experience.
get a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's a gift shop on the way out.
Obviously-
Don't forget our hashtag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If the second an ayahuasca place has a hashtag, like I'm going to question what's
Yeah.
going on there.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's against the purpose, obviously. That's
Exactly.
what I was trying to say.
the counter argument to that would be so many people would try meditation and give up because they never get to a there. They never have an experience that tells them there's something there to be found. I wouldn't say psychedelics send you down the path. They kind of bring you to an aerial view where you can see the path, maybe. Or what?
I would say that there's no actual there to get to.
Speaking of enlightenment being the final disappointment, that
Yeah.
right?
Like
There's no arriving.
The idea that the enlightened mind is already naturally within us in every present moment.
Right. And that's the
But I mean, like the MDMA therapy, especially in ayahuasca trips, like I don't want to in any way make it seem like I don't think that's valid or has its time and its place. Like I certainly do in cultures and everything. But maybe it's a way of allowing whoever takes it to relax.
There might be such strong holding happening
exactly
for some people
clinging,
to like, yeah, exactly,
and squeezing, and just like this inability, like if you pinch a nerve in your back and like for days you're just like lied up on the couch, why can't I relax? I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that's helpful for them. Like it's
absolutely.
a nice little push.
It's just like it unblocks something.
It unblocks something. Sam Harris has an article on his website called Drugs and the Meaning of Life. And his argument is essentially like, as a very skeptical, just materialistic, grounded kind of mind, he's not sure. And he's made his life basically about meditation, more or less. Like he went on 3-year retreats at one point. Or over the course of 3 years, did a bunch of 3-month retreats with breaks in between.
Sure.
And he said he only got convinced to go into that direction because of his experience with LSD, that he had such a shift of what he thought he was or his mind was, and then thought, okay, I have to traverse this territory now and see what's there as a sober being.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not a replacement, but I think it might be
it can be a tool
that pushes you to if you're stuck in one place and you can't get unstuck, or trauma is so buried in the subconscious that your conscious mind can't access your 4-year-old memories. But people have mushroom trips and then say they confronted the exact thing, and they have that moment after the mushroom trip of like, oh, like I'm free. I don't have the baggage. So I definitely am more of a fan of this like guided therapy version of it, because it's much more careful.
It's therapeutic.
And it's aiming at healing, and it's for people who have PTSD or some diagnosable trauma. I would say probably doing it on your own is much more.
Then it's like the question of self-medication.
Yeah.
And that's generally not good.
And of course, people take psychedelics just to party. And like, my interest in them would never be as a party drug, but more as like let me go into the woods and just see what's up.
I mean, microdosing is interesting. I had a friend who was into that, and like he seemed to navigate it really well, but probably not.
You're playing with fire a little bit though.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Because then
I was just researching that though. Like if you, I think, really dose it well and like really experiment. Like I was reading this article, this person did that for a year, but try to like dose it differently, like micro, but like just different ratios. And when you find the right balance, I think it really has a lot of positive effects. And if you can measure the right exact amount of like how much you're taking every day, I think
you entrain yourself into a more positive mindset. You create a groove.
Wow. Talk about music. We just had an ABA back to the beginning form here. So that's a good time to get into some bonus questions if you're down.
Sure.
These are like, they can be as fast or slow as you want. They can be 3 words. They can be whatever.
Great.
What's the most intense experience you've had in meditation? Does one pop to mind, like where it was like oh my gosh, that was a crazy day? Or
I have just cried my eyes out and like convulsed in fetal position in just an outpouring of emotion.
Yeah.
And like, bawling release.
Amazing. I think it's so
it was a release. Yeah. I mean, and it was so exhausting, but it was a very deep release.
Yeah. Dan Harris, who wrote the book 10% Happier, he was in one of the chapters, he was at one of these 10-day Vipassana retreats, and he said he didn't even see it coming until like 5 seconds before. and he started sobbing, and he's like, "Oh my God, I'm the guy at this meditation retreat that's on the floor sobbing." And everyone's like, "The fuck's up with this guy?" Like, but he said, the feeling after it is just like a thunderstorm comes through. Causes like the convulsions are intense, right?
Yeah, it's so visceral. I mean, and there's no controlling it. And I mean, I guess you can, but like in those moments, I wanted to go deeper with it. It's like you want to let that come up.
I mean, it's a deep sadness about whatever, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like for me, like I don't understand where the depth of the sadness goes, but you can tell there's a deep sadness at existing, you know?
For me, just like it's related to trauma in my bloodline, right? Like, so I really believe trauma can be passed from generation to generation.
Definitely. It's scientifically proven that you can carry trauma from your genetics.
Like stress,
sure.
Just elevated stress affects the next generation.
Yeah, like I think on a physiological level, but then naturally on an emotional level, like if your parents suffered abuse and trauma in their life, naturally they're going to view the world through a worldview that's shaped by that, and that's going to affect you as being their offspring.
Their unconscious behaviors from whatever they experience get imprinted onto you. Yeah.
And like, so that was a direct relation for me with those really emotional releases.
That's intense, yeah.
Yeah.
You said you read a lot of books. If you could gift a book to everyone you know, what would it be?
Pema Chodron's When Things Fall Apart.
Okay. I'll look that up. I don't.
Yeah, it's real good.
When Things Fall Apart. Okay, there's a book called Things Fall Apart that's not about that at all.
That's by That's
you know
that's a novel.
That's a novel. Okay, I was like, I read something like that
or something.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have to read that for undergrad? Is that how I know it, or am I just totally blurring?
Maybe you read it in high school.
Okay.
Yeah. I read it after I read Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. I read it and someone was like, you should read this because it's like the contrary story of what life is like colonialism in Africa.
What's the gist of the...
So Joseph Conrad...
oh, no, I mean the other book that you said...
the Pema Chodron?
Yeah. Oh. We'll save Conrad for another podcast episode.
So Pema Chodron is an American Buddhist nun, and it's about compassion and dealing with your emotions and cultivating this place of inexhaustible compassion for yourself and for all beings.
Right.
And like how to really manifest that in more detail. I mean, she's a brilliant writer. Yeah. It's so good and easy to read. Like, yeah.
The theme is right. You have to have compassion for your own bullshit first before you could ever have it for someone else.
Because it radiates outward.
Yeah. And you know yourself better than you'll ever know someone else. So if you can't manage to find that place for your own thoughts or actions, it's going to be really hard to manifest that for someone who you don't have the internal motivation structures and all that. Yeah.
True.
What's your best memory of playing a concert and what made it so good?
The first thing that came to mind was a concert that I played with Mikhail Darmany and Allison Rowe and Brian Back. And it was just in January, and it was a house concert. It was at Evelyn Bromley's house.
Oh, wait, was I there?
You might have been there.
I think I was there.
And I mean, it was just great. Like Mikhail and I played a duo, and then they played a trio, and then I played a trio with Mikhail and Allison, and it was just wonderful.
Nice.
Yeah.
It just felt like things were right.
The musical vibe was right. I mean, these are people that I love, you know, so playing with people you love. And also I think like being a professional musician, you play a lot of gigs.
Yeah.
And gigs are
the word
work.
Gig.
It's work, right? And like sometimes that work feels really good and it feels great and it's really rewarding. But like I've just come to appreciate concert. Sure. Like when there's an audience full of people that are there and they're offering themselves to you to be moved.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And if as a performer, you're able to like ride that and move with them and be moved yourself, that's just
Those
the most.
those concerts at Evelyn's house have that vibe regularly because the people. This is a small house. I mean, it's a big house compared to any house I've lived in, but I mean,
it's a small room.
it's a small
living room.
very
Yeah.
intimate, very intimate.
Nice.
And she has a nice piano, so she puts on these concerts there, and
The audience loves
audience
it. They're
loves it,
they're
yeah.
there to feel good.
yeah.
And so it's just super encouraging and it's just fun
And there's
yeah.
like a wine and cheese thing after it,
Yeah.
and there's just good vibes going around
exactly.
there. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, last one. What can you remember about the time you laughed the hardest? Anything popping in?
A couple things. Like I can remember being a kid with my cousin and my sister and just laughing, like
Yeah.
cackling like hyenas
At nothing.
And at nothing, and like you get drunk off of that laughter, and like it just builds and cycles, and you just start laughing, and then something stupid happens, and you laugh even harder, and
Yeah,
it just
yeah.
sets it all off again, and
Yeah.
just like crying, laughing.
I love that feeling.
Yeah.
It's funny though. You were saying about bawling, crying. Crying, laughing, and bawling, crying are not so unrelated.
Yeah,
They're sort
yeah.
of like the brain's reaction
Sure.
to an intense storm of energy. You know?
but
Like the same muscles actually convulse when you're
Right.
crying. You're like, oh,
I
I
can't breathe.
stop it. Stop it. Yeah.
I'm gonna pee myself.
But I love that feeling. Let's say it happens,
yeah.
I don't know, it depends, but once a month would be nice. I can't say it happens that much
Yeah,
where you've lost it crying, laughing, I mean.
Yeah.
yeah.
We do that once in a while.
Once
Like
in a
you
while,
and I
yeah.
just
I don't
out of
know
nowhere.
how it happens, but
Yeah, we
Yeah.
just
maybe
laugh
some
for like 2
fairy
hours.
So
flew into the
beautiful.
apartment and blows a little tripping dust in our nose or something, but
Yeah.
you just you stop, you're all right, we're good.
They
And then
start
somebody
again.
just goes,
Yeah, totally.
Those are
awesome.
the best.
Well, thanks for coming on, dude.
It's been a real pleasure,
It was
guys.
exactly as good as I thought it would be. Meditation, jazz, all the good stuff. Anything you want to point people to? Do you have like a website or anything like that, or are you just
I don't.
whatever?
Yeah,
Cool.
just feel good.
We'll post some links of you playing something.
Sounds great.
Like you're on YouTube somewhere, I'm sure.
Somewhere.
Somewhere. You're all over the place. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, man.
Thanks, guys.
Yanka, come on.
Oh, bye.
All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Exploring Kodawari. If you enjoyed it, we hope you'll consider sharing it on social media and with friends. You can also help us out by leaving a rating and a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Those help us more than you would think. And if you'd like to help us out in a more substantial way, consider going over to our website to make a donation through PayPal. Links are in the episode notes for this. You can do this as a one-time donation or a recurring monthly donation. All of that support will help us to set aside time in order to create content for the podcast and the blog. And finally, please get in touch with us and say hi, either on social media or privately through email. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.